We really conclude the whole section dealing with the building of the Mishkan, the traveling temple in the desert, known as the tabernacle. And it's and in this parsha, we're just about getting in the Torah. It's almost Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which it is for us as well. We're almost there. And it happens on Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the temple. This Mishkan, this temple is assembled. What happens in the previous weeks is that Hashem gets Bezalel and others, that they are going to make everything necessary. They make the walls, they make the floor, they make the objects that go inside, everything. But now they have to put it together, right? You have all the pieces, you have, right? You know, you've got all the drywall, you've got all the wood, you've got everything you need. It's assembled on the site. It's ready to go. Now you have to put it together like a puzzle, right? So that's where we are in this parsha. So it begins by saying Moshe assembles the entire assembly of the children of Israel. He brings everyone together, and he begins by teaching them some Torah. He teaches them about Shabbos, and then he starts telling them about things that they need to finalize the Mishkan, like to dye the wool to make it look right. They already have the wool, but to dye it. They need some gold, and they need some silver, they need some copper for various things within it. And so he says here, right on page 516 and 517, he says that he uses the expression here, every wise-hearted person among you shall come and make everything that Hashem has commanded. Right, in the original Hebrews, V'kol chacham leiv bechem, anyone who has a wisdom, right, they should come and do what Hashem said. And then it talks about what it is that they have to do. And Hashem says they have to make the tabernacle, the tent, the covers, the hooks, the planks, the bars, all the different parts, the menorah, and so forth, and they have to do it. And then it says in the next page that everyone said okay, and they left. And now it begins with a funny statement. Beginning here on verse 21, which is the second aliyah, it says, Vayavo kol ish asher naso livo, v'kol asher nedava rucho oso, havias trumas Hashem l'malachas ol moed. Right, it says that, and all of the people who came, and it says the expression is naso libo. We have to see what that actually means. And they came to do what Moshe said, right? In verse 21, every man whose heart inspired him came, and everyone whose spirit motivated him brought the portions of Hashem for the work of the tent of meeting. So here you have this expression that each person, it says here, right, who is V'naso livo, right? And in the English it says his heart inspired him, right? Naso livo, and this is a unique expression. It's something that we haven't heard before. This expression in the Torah, and here it uses this expression, and the commentators wonder about it, because what is it really telling us? And it's saying it's not so much that it's the people necessarily when we say heart inspired them. That's true. That's what the words mean. But it's more than that. But naso is to carry, to raise up something. And here it means that your heart carries you. It raises you. It lifts, elevates you. And that means that a person who felt that he is committed to building the Mishkan, right? He's committed. I want to see the Mishkan built. It's got to be built. No matter what it takes, we're going to do it. God wants it built, we're going to do it. That's what it's talking about, a person who's ready to say that. It doesn't mean a person who's necessarily trained as a carpenter, a person who's trained as a gold worker. What they're telling us here is it's a person who has a serious, passionate commitment to getting the job done. And this point is a very important point. Because, for instance, of course, in order to build something, right, let's say you want to build a house, you need a person who knows how to do drywall. You need a person who knows how to do electricity, somebody who knows how to do plumbing, right? Those are important. You have to have the knowledge to do it. But what the Torah is telling us here, that it's at least as important, or perhaps it's actually telling us that it's more important, that if you want to get a job done well, especially what seems to be a daunting, a difficult job, the people who you do it have to be passionate that they want to do it. And it's important to them to get it done. Right? It's one thing to hire a worker to work in your house who knows how to do what he has to do. Right? If he doesn't know how, you're not going to hire him. But it's a whole different story when you hire a person who has pride in his work, who cares that the work is done well. Right? A guy can come to your house and he can do your drywall, and it'll look fine to you and me. But if a guy has pride in his work, it'll be perfect. It'll be poetic, really. It'll be artistic. It won't just be a piece of drywall on the wall. He'll do it well. And that's what the Torah is telling us here. That it's not, it doesn't tell us that, it tells us first Moshe needed carpenters, and he needed gold workers and silver workers and all these different things. But then it says who came? Those whose heart inspired them. That's who came. And this is to say that the Torah is telling us that if you want a commitment to do something well, you have to be committed to doing it. You have to care. You have to want it to happen. And of course you have to have the knowledge. But even more important than the knowledge is that commitment. So one of my teachers told me a story once, which is actually found in a biography about the Reichman family. And with these biographies, you never know if they're actually true or not. But it certainly could be true, and it does sound, from the little experience I have, that it was accurate. And it says that originally when the Reichmans came here, and they got into business, so they were in the tile business, the Olympia and York Tile. That's a tile company on Lawrence Avenue today. And they were in the tile business, so they would import or manufacture, whatever, they would sell tiles. And they needed a warehouse. So in order to have a warehouse, they decided that they would rent. They couldn't find one that they wanted, so they said they're going to get land, they're going to hire someone to build it. So they asked somebody, how much will it cost to build this warehouse for us? And the guy came back with a price that was, for that time, an exorbitant amount of money to build a warehouse. So Mr. Reichman said, you know what? I think I could probably build this warehouse for less money. Now, he wasn't a builder. He had never built a thing before. He was in the sales of tiles. But he came to the realization that my business has to succeed. And I wanted to succeed well. I wanted to I want to be able to make a living, give charity, whatever's behind it. He wanted his business to succeed. He was passionate about it. So they came back with a price that he felt would not work for his business. So he says, I'm going to do it. And here's a person who had no experience in building, and they went out and he did it. And from there, he said, you know what? This is not so difficult. I can do this. And he went out and he started doing building. And that's how the company became a company that did building. It built office buildings, built all kinds of things. And it came from that. Now, if the story's true or not, I'm not positive. It's in a biography. But the idea is true, that he was a person who's passionate, who cares, it's important to him that this business succeeds. And therefore, I'll do what I have to do to make it succeed. And if I have to become a general contractor and build a building, that's what I'll do. And in the end, what he was doing, that one job, became the essence of what he did for a living, eventually, and it became who they are. And it's the same thing here. You can have a gold worker, you can have a carpenter, you can have a plumber, you can have all of the things, the people you need to work in the Mishkan. But what you really want are the people who are committed, who are prepared to do whatever they have to do to make it work. And that's why he uses that expression. Because when Moshe asks for all these artisans to come, who comes? The people who are inspired are the ones who came. Because they're the ones who get the job done. So that's why it says that there. And then it goes on. In verse 22, a very strange wording. It says, Uvahu hanashim al hanashim kol nadiv lev haviu. So it says, literally, if you look in verse 22, it says the men came with the women. But that's not what the Hebrew says. So the person who translated this translated it with commentary. In other words, he understood what it's saying, but it's not literally what it's saying. What it's literally saying is, in verse 22, it says that Vayivohu hanashim, and the men came al hanashim, on the women. They came on the women. That is to say, it seems like it's a wording of force, that the men did something to force the women. Right? In other words, what were the men doing? Moses said, we need gold, we need silver, we need copper, we need hides for the Mishkan. So people went out to get it. So the men went to their wives, and they wives had jewelry that they acquired primarily from the Egyptians, but they had jewelry. So it sounds like it's saying that the men forced the women to give their jewelry for the temple. The women said, it's one thing, I don't mind giving some money, but my jewelry is my jewelry. That's what it sounds like. Right? The men came on the women. In other words, on is it's a feeling of forcing, right? And in fact, if you read Rashi also thinks that the wording sounds that way. So he says here, let's see, where is it? I don't want to wait too long with it, but let's see if I can find that Rashi relatively quickly. Yud Tes Al Hanashim. It says on the women. So Rashi says Im Hanashim, with the women, v'smuchim leim, and they are relying upon them. That is to say, Rashi says, if you read these words, it sounds like the men are forcing the women. So Rashi says that's not what happened. That's not what it means. It means that the men came with the women, and they were relying on the jewelry of the women. So that's what it means that the men came upon the women. Literally, it sounds like they forced them, right? But that's not the only commentary. There's another commentary that's worth discussing that says something very different. And this this commentary, it's one of the Tosfos, he compares and contrasts this with another occasion where we find the men having to go to the women to get jewelry. The other occasion was just in last week's Parsha, where we have the sin of the golden calf, where the Jewish people, the nation, comes to a conclusion that Moshe is not coming down from the mountain, and that we've lost him. He's dead. He's up in the mountain. He died. And therefore, we're lost in the desert. We have no leader. So they decide to worship a golden calf, right, which was the god of the Egyptians, where they came from. So they go and they have to get gold. So how do they get gold? The men go and they tear the gold away from their wives. They tear out their earrings, they take their bracelets, all of their gold, and they gather it together and they make this calf. Right? So it's a very similar thing. Here Moshe says, I need gold and silver and all these different things. So the men go, and it sounds like they take it from their wives again in order to build this. But the wording actually shows you that there's a difference in the two cases. What this commentary is telling us, that in the case with the golden calf, it's clear that the men forcibly took the jewelry from the women, because the women did not want to give their jewelry to worship an idol. They were not prepared to give it up for that. That was wrong. In this case, where Moshe sends the people out to go and gather what he needs for the Mishkan, the women are gladly giving their jewelry for the temple, because they want to be a part of this. This is not an idol. This is the Jewish temple. This is built on the Word of God. This is Moshe telling the Jewish people. So here, the men don't have to force the women at all. The women want to do it. The women are encouraging. They're pushing the men. They want this to happen. So that's why Rashi says it doesn't mean that the men forced the women. It says the men went with the women. And this other commentary says that it was really the women who inspired the men. That the women were the ones who pushed the men because they wanted to give for this purpose. And here we see a difference in the two cases. And why is it that we have to think that it's one thing you see in both cases the men act the same way. In the case of the golden calf, the men need to go to their wives for their gold. And in the case of this week's Parsha, the men go to their wives for gold, to get gold. But over there, the men have been convinced that we have to worship a golden calf. The women are not convinced. The women know that Moshe is coming back. They know there's a God. They know we're not supposed to worship idols. So they're not prepared to give their jewelry for that. In this week's Parsha, the men go to get the jewelry, and the women are willfully giving it. How do the women know that it's like in one case yes, in one case no, and the men don't? The men are confused, but the women seem to be correct. How is that? So the answer is that we know that the women throughout history have always been the harbingers of the redemption. In other words, that the women have never fallen for the idea that the game is over, we're finished, right? The Jews lost. They've never accepted that. You see it earlier in the story of Egypt, where the Jews are in Egypt, they're slaves for hundreds of years. Right? Hundreds of years, that's generations. Your great-great-grandfather was a slave and your grandchildren will be slaves. That's how long it was. So here, the men go and they speak to the chief rabbi, right? The head of the Jewish people at that time was Amram, Moshe's father, and they say, what are we doing? We're slaves, our fathers, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, our children, our grandchildren are all going to be slaves. We should not have any more children. Because why should we give birth to children so they should be slaves? So the head of the Jewish people says, you're right. And he makes a decree that there should be no more children. Nobody should have children anymore, because they're all going to be slaves. And his daughter, Miriam, who was the sister of Moshe, she goes to her father and tells him, you're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh only wants to kill the boys. You want to kill the boys and the girls. There should be no children. You're worse than Pharaoh. He understands what she's saying, and he changes his opinion, and he tells the people to have children. But here he had given up hope, right? The head of the Jewish people gave up hope. There's no change. We're going to be slaves. Our children are going to be slaves. What do you need to give birth to children so they should be slaves? He had the same thing in the 80s. And then in the 80s now, 1980s, where people would say, why am I going to have children? There's going to be a nuclear bomb. Right? I should bring children into a world where one day they're going to wake up and they're going to disappear because of nuclear war. I'm not going to bring children into this world. But you heard people say this, right? Because people have given up hope. The world is going to destroy itself. That's what they actually believed. It didn't happen, but they actually believed this. It's the same thing with Amram. He believed we're slaves. We're going to be slaves for a lot longer. Why should we have children? So they should be killed or they should be slaves, which is what was happening. So Miriam, a woman, she says, what do you mean there's no hope? There is hope. God promised that we're going to go out of Egypt. We're going out of Egypt. So don't go saying you're not going to have children because Pharaoh's going to kill them. Or don't go saying we're not going to have children because they're going to be born into slavery. We're going to have, she says, you're worse than Pharaoh. We should have children because God's going to take us out of Egypt. Here Miriam showed that it was part of the femininity of who she was, showed that there is always hope. There is always something new. The situation will change. And therefore she didn't allow that. Now we go to our times where the men go to the women and want to take the jewelry in order to worship the golden calf. The women say, forget it. What do you mean Moshe's dead and it's over? God promised us we're going to the land of Israel. God promised us the Torah. God promised us all of these things. If God promises it, he's doing it. The women didn't question that. So they wouldn't give the men the jewelry. When the Mishkan was built, the Mishkan was built in order to atone for the sin of the golden calf. And the men didn't want it because it was a constant reminder of what they did wrong. But for the women, it was a reminder that they never gave up hope. So when Moshe came and said, who wants to give the gold for the Mishkan? The women did. The women jumped forward and said, take our jewelry because the temple needs it. We're for. But for a golden calf, for an idol, we're not doing it. That was the difference. And that is why the commentaries tell us that women were given a special gift based on this. And the gift was that the holiday of Rosh Chodesh is a holiday for women. And there's many laws that women aren't supposed to work on Rosh Chodesh, not like Shabbos, but you're not supposed to do extra work, you're not supposed to do work that doesn't have to be done. It's a special holiday for women. That is, and it is given to women. And primarily it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is this month, because that's when this happened. This story happened with the women giving the stuff and the temple being made. And the point is that the women understood that you never have to give up hope. You're never hopeless. There's always a future, which is why we believe that women are the ones who always bring the redemption. There was Esther brought the redemption. The story of Hanukkah, the woman brought the redemption. Miriam in the story of going out of Egypt, she helped bring the redemption. So many things were women. So we believe that it's always going to be the hands of women that are going to bring our redemption. And here also you see it. So why is it that God gives them the gift of Rosh Chodesh? Right? Give them another gift. Why that gift? Why does God give them that and say, because you never gave up hope, because you know that when I say something it happens, because you believe the Jews will be redeemed and they'll be brought back to Israel, because of that, I'm giving you the holiday of Rosh Chodesh. Well, why does he give them the holiday of Rosh Chodesh? Why does he give them Shabbos? Why doesn't he give them Shal Shudas? Why doesn't he give them special food to eat? Why not this? And that's because of what Rosh Chodesh stands for. Rosh Chodesh stands for a very important concept. That the Torah commands the Jewish people, the first mitzvah, the Jewish people are commanded. Right? You can imagine, here the Jewish people are a bunch of nothing, and they're slaves. And then suddenly God makes a nation out of them, and he says, you are my nation, and you are special, and I'm going to give you special commandments. And what's his first commandment? Is that you should create a calendar, right, based with Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month. You should mark the beginning of the month. That's important. Now, you say that that's absurd. If God wants to say we're special, and he's going to treat us differently, and because of how we've lived and how we've acted, he's going to treat us special. So what does this mean? The first mitzvah he gives us is to mark a calendar with Rosh Chodesh. Give me a mitzvah to keep Shabbos. Give me a mitzvah to save lives. Give me an important mitzvah. Why this? And the point is that this is the same answer as to why the women were given this holiday of Rosh Chodesh as a special gift. And that's because Rosh Chodesh, it comes from the idea of a chadash, something new. The sun is pretty much the same every day. right? The sun is the sun. But the moon, as far as it appears to us, is different every day. It gets big, it gets small, right? It changes. It's in this part of the sky, it's in that part of the sky. It changes all the time. That is, the moon is chadash, it's new. The moon symbolizes the idea of recreation, because the moon will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it'll be full, and then it'll get smaller, 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 and it'll disappear. And the next thing you know, it comes back. It's reborn. It's always, the moon, we know by looking at the moon that there's always hope. Because even when the moon disappears, we know it's going to come back. It's going to show up again. And it does. That's the idea of renewal, of rebirth, and that's exactly what the women were doing. The women believed, no matter what the situation we're in now, God promised us it's going to happen, and they brought the redemption. So therefore, the holiday that symbolizes the idea of renewal, of refinding ourselves, of being assured that God's promises will happen, is the holiday of Rosh Chodesh. And that's why God gave that to women. So that's what we can see that just from this pasuk alone, of why they did just this. Now it says that one of the things that the women specifically gave, because it says when you get to the end, there was, they looked around, what do we need? All right, we got enough. We got enough animal hides, fine. We have enough silver, fine. What do we need? So it says that what they needed was these gold vessels, like a pot made out of gold. You didn't cook with the pot, but you used the pot to carry water, and then they would bring it to the outer edge of the temple, and the Kohen, before he would work, would wash his hands and his feet with this pot. And it was made out of gold. It was made out of copper. And he said, right, and they used that to wash their hands and their feet. So Moshe made a call. We don't have it. Right? This is missing. So the women came and they brought their mirrors, because you used copper for a mirror back then. Because one thing is that you could see your reflection, right? It was because it's very shiny. The second thing is the color of the copper helps hide imperfections. If you have like a blemish on your face, the copper is a dark color, but it shines, it reflects, but it's dark. It looks like you have a suntan. Right? So the women would use it because it made them look good. Right? They would use them that way. Now there's an actual story from the Torah, based on the Torah, about the women using these mirrors, and it says that the women had these mirrors. What is the purpose of a mirror? For vanity. So you should look good. You take out the mirror, you look at it, you put on your makeup. Right? That's how you know how you look. Otherwise, you're going to put your lipstick on your nose. You don't know what you're doing. So the mirror helps you do that. So it says that when back in the story that I told you, where Amram, the head of the Jewish people in Egypt, decided there's going to be no more children, the women said, "Forget it. We're not going to do that. There are going to be more children. God's going to save us." And they went out into the fields where their husbands were slaves, were working for Pharaoh. And while they went out there, one sec, excuse me. Thank you. So when women went out to the fields where their husbands are working, and they went near their husbands, and they brought their mirrors, and they said, "Don't I look pretty? Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. Picture. Look at me." And they seduced their husbands, so that the husbands would have relations with them, and they'd have children. Right? So these mirrors, right, are used for vanity. Right? Now they wanted to take this mirrors and they wanted to donate it to the temple for the Kohen to use. And sorry. So Moshe doesn't want to take them. Here's a holy temple, right, where you serve God, and we're going to make something out of these mirrors that women used to seduce their husbands to have relations with them. That's what you want to put in the temple? Moshe says that it's not right. Something like this, it's like putting lingerie in the temple. You don't do that, right? And God told him, you're wrong. That the women used these mirrors to beautify themselves so that there should be Jewish people. They didn't do it for vanity. They didn't do it for pleasure. They did it so that they could convince their husbands, who were without hope, who were desperate, who had no futures, and working in the fields with no future because they're slaves. They went out there in order to entice their husbands to have relations so they should have children, because they knew the Jewish people would live. And therefore these mirrors are an example of taking the physical world and using it for good purposes. And therefore it's perfectly appropriate that these mirrors should be used in the temple. And then women came and they donated their mirrors, and they made these pots, which the Kohen washes his hands and his feet with out of those, which was the thing that they needed to finish the temple. Now the commentaries want to know, after all that, what is the significance of using these mirrors for the object that the Kohen washes his hands and his feet with? Like maybe you want to say we need the mirrors in order to make the menorah. Why this pot, right? The idea is, well, if you look in the Torah, it says that the Kohen doesn't have to wash his hands and feet. It says he has the mekadesh, his hands and his feet. That is, he makes holy his hands and his feet. Just like we make our hands holy when we wash our hands before we eat bread. That's not cleaning, right? If your hands are dirty, you should wash your hands to clean them. And then if you're going to have bread, you should wash your hands again. Because this has nothing to do with being clean. So too with the Kohanim. The Kohanim wash their hands and feet when they come in, thank you, into the Beis HaMikdash, not because their hands and feet were dirty, even if they might have been. They did it to make themselves holy, to prepare their body to be involved in holy things. So they washed their hands and their feet, and they showed that symbolically that's what they're doing. And therefore it's perfectly appropriate that the women's mirrors, which most people would say are vanity, they're there so women should, look at themselves and look how pretty they are, and that's not how they used it. In this case, the women used the mirrors in order to get their husbands to give them children. That was why. Because they knew the Jewish people were coming out of Egypt, even though the men had given up hope. So therefore, these mirrors were used for a holy purpose. You took something that is not holy, vanity, makeup, sexuality, which seems to be, the opposite of holiness, and they made it holy. And so too the Kohanim, who hands and their legs you can use your hands and legs for anything. You can drive a car, you can eat food, or you can use your hands and legs for mitzvahs. They took the physical world, the Kohen, and they made it spiritual, just like the women did. So it's perfectly appropriate that their mirrors should be made into the kior, the actual pot that was used to hold the water for the Kohanim to wash in. So that it actually fits very well. Let's go on. Let's see which one we can talk about next. All right, if we look on 525, it talks here in beginning in verse 6 about these very odd creations. We all know that you're not supposed to create idols, right? An idol is a human, and it can be many things, but one of them is a human form. It looks like a human being made out of some object, and they're used for religious purposes. So here the Torah tells us that after the Bezalel created the ark that held the Ten Commandments, the first Torah, it was a very special ark. He then went, it says here, and he made, beginning on verse 7 and 525, he made 2 cherubs of gold. Hammered out did he make them from the 2 ends of the cover, 1 cherub from the end at one side and 1 cherub from the end at the other. From the cover did he make the cherubs from its 2 ends. The cherubs were with wings spread upwards, sheltering the cover with their wings, with their faces towards one another. Toward the cover were the faces of the cherubs. Now, what is a cherub? A cherub is a piece of gold that is formed to look like a baby, a human baby with wings. That's basically what it looked like. And it was, and therefore it sounds like an idol that you have on top of the ark. In the temple, we have these 2 little objects, right, that are facing each other. They look like human babies with wings, right, made out of gold. And if you want to tell me that an example of what appears to be an idol, that appears to be an idol. That's what it looks like. It looks like an idol. And one wonders, if Judaism is so diametrically opposed to anything to do with idols, why would we allow an idol not only in the temple, but in the Holy of Holies in the temple, in the area above the ark, where you have such an intense thing, and here you have these, what appears to be idols, right? So The commentaries talk quite a bit on various different levels about what these entities were and what they were for and how they worked. Let's first talk about how they worked. So how they worked is that they made these two babies out of gold with wings, and they placed them above the ark, facing each other. And it says that they represented the Jewish people and God. One is symbolic of the Jewish people, one is symbolic of God. And it says that when God and the Jewish people are close, where we're doing our job and God has that relationship with us, that he's close with us, so then the two cherubim face each other and they get interwoven together, like because their wings go like this, right? So they're like that. When the Jewish people and God are not getting along, Jewish people aren't doing their job, so they faced away from each other. Miraculously, these things would turn away from each other, symbolic of the relationship between the Jews and God. Interestingly enough, by the way, when the temple was destroyed, when they actually came and destroyed the temple, and they went inside of the Holy of Holies, they found that cherubim were actually interwoven facing each other, which means that God and the Jewish people were close. But yet it certainly didn't seem that way, because the Jewish people are being killed in the streets and the temple is being destroyed. It doesn't sound like there's much affection going on, but the fact is that there was. Because the point is that God loves the Jewish people. And sometimes when you love somebody, you need to punish them. But you don't destroy them, you punish them. Right? If you have a child, and you tell the child, you can't cross the street by yourself, you're not old enough, you're not ready, you can't do it, you could get hit by a car and killed. Right? So, and let's say you go out, you come home, and your kid did it. He went out on his own, he crossed the street, and he's fine, but he shouldn't have done it, especially since you told him. So you have to punish him. You have to do something to that child to remind them that there's ramifications to your actions. Thank God you didn't get hit by a car, but you did something stupid, and you can't do it again, and there's ramifications, so you have a punishment. Does it mean you hate the kid? No, it doesn't mean. Does it mean you want to destroy the kid? No, it means you love the child. Right? Because you have to do something that you don't really want to do, because you need that child to learn how to act, to save themselves, to help themselves. So you want to do that. You help them. It's the same thing with God. God and the Jewish people love each other. If the Jewish people aren't doing their job, so God has to do things to show the ramifications of our actions, so that we'll do the right thing. We won't go off the path. We'll stay on the path and we'll do what's right. So therefore he gives us punishments. But he gives us the punishments not because he hates us, not because he wants to destroy us, but because he loves us. So therefore, when they went into the temple, during the destruction of the temple, they saw the two angels, right, these two cherubim, interwoven like this, as if they were like one. That is, man and God love each other. And that was exactly the point. They do. So now these cherubim, as I said, they're symbolic of little children. And so there's much symbolism about the idea of how important little children are in the world of Torah. They're our future. They're full of potential. They're innocent. All types of character traits and ideas that we all would admire in ourselves, that little children have. But the commentaries do not. They obviously find it difficult that there were these entities that looked like people. They were put in there because they don't really comment much about the idea of why God wanted these things, they look like idols, in the temple. And they sort of talk about what the message is of them and what they do and how they work, as I did. And the point being is that this appears to be one of the few things that the Torah discusses with us or tells us about or commands us to do, which is counterintuitive, goes against logic. Right? Usually everything in Judaism can be logical, can be understood. And the Torah requires you to try to understand it. But there are certain things that you can't understand, or that they're very difficult to understand. And it very well could be that this is one of them. That it was made the way they were in order for us to understand that this is the exception to the rule. The rule is that Torah can be understood, but there are parts of the Torah that are beyond us. And therefore this is telling us, this is an example of something in the Torah that is not explained. And yet, therefore, it teaches us about the idea of faith. That there is an important aspect of to be an observant Jew is to have faith in God. To believe that God's going to do what he promises. To believe that there is a God. To believe that God gave us a Torah and that he expects us to do things. And that we expect things from God. Right? That's a reality in our belief system. That we have such a thing. That God will act in a certain way. He has expectations of us and so forth. That concept right, of God being that way is extremely important to this idea, because faith plays an integral part in religion. Most religions, like I remember when I was working on campus, one of my first jobs after I left Kollel was I worked on a university campus, and there's every religion on the campus, and all of the chaplains, right, which I was a chaplain of the Jewish people, they'd meet together. So what you had on the campus here was you had 10 different types of Christians. You had a Catholic, you had an Episcopalian, you had a Baptist, 10 different types of Christians. You had one Muslim, and you had me, right? And so I can remember them coming to me and saying, to this guy at the first meeting, and what is your faith? I'm Episcopalian. And what is your faith? I'm a Baptist. What is your faith? And they came to me and they asked me that question. So the truth is, Judaism is not a faith. In general, Judaism has components of faith. But the basis of Judaism is the requirement to be critical and to learn. That when I tell you something, you ask me a question, I give you an answer. We don't want you to just blindly follow what we tell you. I want you to question, to critique, to involve yourself, to learn and understand why I said what I said. So usually when a person asks me a question, I don't just give them the answer. I usually give them the whole concept behind the answer so that they understand the environment that this answer is coming in, that they have a better understanding of it. The idea is that Judaism is not based on faith. Judaism is based on fact, right, and critique. We question. Every generation, the rabbis question the rabbis from the generation before, and then they answer the questions. And we find, after all that the Torah is true. But nevertheless, we don't simply accept it. Other religions, on the other hand, seem to be filled with faith. Their religion very well could be absurd. It could make no sense at all. And you're supposed to believe it on faith. And therefore, for them, faith is very important. So for me to ask them, what faith are you? It makes sense. For them to ask me, what faith am I? It doesn't make sense. Faith plays a role in Judaism, right? Like in this case with the cherubim. There's faith that God is telling us what's correct. But faith is not the central part of Judaism. And it's very different than it is to the other religions. We have a description here of the menorah, all different aspects of the menorah. Now the menorah in the temple was not like the menorah for Hanukkah. The menorah for Hanukkah has 4 on one side, 4 on the other side, and 1 in the center, right? So the menorah in the temple had 3 on each side and 1 in the center. So it didn't have the same number as the one on Hanukkah. The one on Hanukkah is really not the menorah. It's really a Hanukkah. It's a menorah for Hanukkah. But the menorah in the temple was different. This one has 9, has 8 nights and the shamash. This one has 7, 6 pieces and the shamash, right? And they're very different. The menorah is an important symbol in Judaism. It symbolizes wisdom, and the pursuit of wisdom, the acquiring of wisdom, and which is why it has 6 candles, because wisdom is something that you can pick up in the world. If people tell you that only Jews know things, they're wrong. Lots of non-Jews know lots of things, and we can learn from non-Jews. Non-Jews have wisdom. They have wisdom. We know. You can have economists who are non-Jews. You can have physicists who are non-Jews. You can have inventors. You can have technologists. You have computer programmers. There's no correlation to say that there's a lack of intelligence in non-Jews. It's just not true. When the Torah says, if someone tells you that the non-Jews have wisdom, believe them. They do. They have wisdom. Right? And the menorah symbolizes wisdom. And the wisdom, though, comes from the world that we live in. Wisdom in and of itself is not necessarily God-given. I mean, everything comes from God, but it's not the same as the idea of how religion or our beliefs and mysticism and so forth seems much more spiritual. This seems very physical. Like, how do you make an economy for a country? How do you know how much interest to charge as the bank rate and things like this? That all comes from the wisdom that people have. That wisdom is what the menorah symbolizes. That's why there's 6 lights on the menorah, because the number 6 corresponds to the number of days of the week, excluding Shabbos. Shabbos is a holy day, right? So therefore, if you take the days of the week, you take Shabbos out, you take the holy day out, you have the regular days. That's what the menorah is symbolizing. The regular world and the wisdom in that regular world. The fact that we light the menorah, the flame is considered spiritual, because the flame is the only object that we know of who appears to want to go up. Everything else in the world goes down, right? Gravity pushes it down. Everything from our bodies to objects that we own, everything starts to go down. But fire is the only thing that seems to want to go up, right? The fire symbolizes the spiritual world, which is going up, going higher. And therefore, if you light the menorah, which is you dedicate the physical world to the spiritual world, then the world runs correctly. And so the menorah that's described here was for that purpose. It was to take the wisdom of the world and to raise it to a level where it had a spiritual use. Just as the example I gave you with the women who took their bronze mirrors, which were usually used for vanity, so that they should put on their makeup and look pretty. In this case, the women used it for the sake of God, that is, to have children. They wanted to entice their husbands to have children. They took the mundane, the physical, and they made it holy. Just like the menorah does the same thing. That's the basis of one of the understandings of the menorah. Okay, just one more thing is that here at the conclusion, there's a very interesting medrash, and it says that that the Jewish people, brought the Mishkan to Moshe. But we know they didn't bring the Mishkan to Moshe because they couldn't assemble it. It was too heavy, the Medrash says. So they brought the parts of the Mishkan to Moshe. That's what they did. And they said that we can't assemble it because it's too difficult. I mean, we don't have cranes. We don't have bulldozers. We're people. How are we supposed to put together a giant building all by ourselves with our hands? We can't do it. So they took all the pieces and they brought it to Moshe. And they said, okay, Moshe, God told us to make a Mishkan. Here's the pieces. This is as far as we can go. Right, that's it. We can't do it. We can't finish it. We can't put it together. So Moshe appeals to God. He says, I can't. If all the Jewish people can't do it, I can't do it all by myself. Right? So God says to him, try. Try to do it. So Moshe tries, and he accomplishes it. In other words, God helps him by making a miracle. He says, try to do it, and God makes the miracle. So the commentaries want to know, if the Jewish people couldn't do it, and Moshe couldn't do it, and God knew that the Jewish people couldn't do it, and he knew that Moshe couldn't do it, because God knows these things, right? So then, why does he put Moshe through this? It's almost like humiliating him. It's like you take a 10-year-old kid, and you say, you want candy? Sure, I want candy. So, okay, if you want candy, I want you to jump 6 feet in the air. So the kid will do it all day. He's never going to jump 6 feet in the air. He's only 2'6". He's a little kid. He's not going to get that high. Not possible. He can jump and jump and jump because he wants that candy. He's never going to do it. Right? If you do that to a child, that's abusing a child. That's cruel. Because he wants it, and he's trying to get it, and it's physically impossible. That's what it sounds like God's doing. God's telling Moshe says to God, I can't do it. It's thousands and thousands of pounds. I can't lift it. So God says, try. What do you mean try? Try. It's thousands of pounds. I can't do it. God says, try, and he makes a miracle. Then he does it. So why doesn't God just make the miracle and then not go through all that? Tell him, try. What do you mean try? You know you can't do it. So why do you make him try? He's going to fail. If you want to make a miracle, make it lighter. Say, make a miracle, and all the parts of the temple are lighter now. So Moshe can do it. But don't go and say try, because he's going to fail, and then make it that he can do it. What's the purpose there, right? So the idea is that we're thinking too goal-oriented. The goal is to make the temple, right? That's not how Hashem and Moshe saw it. When Moshe said he couldn't do it, so Hashem is teaching him a lesson, which is it's the effort that I'm looking for. See, in the world that we live in, at least when you get out of grade school, effort is not how you're judged. Results are how you're judged. You're in graduate school, you take a course, you write a paper, you take a test. They don't care how hard you try. They care how good it is, what your mark is. That's what they're interested in. When you're a little kid in grade school, so they send a message to your parents, he got a B in this class, but he's trying very hard. And your parents always say, well, you're trying hard, that's all I ask. I don't ask that you get A's, because if you can't, you can't. I ask that you try, right? But in the world outside, that's not how it works, right? How much you try makes no difference. It's how do you succeed, right? That's how the world is. But that's not how it is in Judaism. That's not how God wants it with the Torah. What God wants, says to Moshe said to God, I can't do it. God says, try. God wants Moshe to make the effort, to try to do it. When you try to do it, right, effort counts. Your intention counts. Your desires count. You want to do the will of God and you can't, now I'll do it for you. So that teaches us a lesson. When we think that there are things that the Torah expects of us and we can't do it, like, I have people say, you want me to keep kosher? How am I supposed to keep kosher? I can't live without lobster. I can't do it. Okay? So that, that it's a silly idea, but people say that, right? They can't do it. The Torah is telling us, if God tells you to keep kosher and not to eat lobster, then you can live without lobster. Try. Make the effort. See what happens. If you make the effort, God will help you, and then you'll be able to do it. If you don't make the effort, you'll definitely fail. There's no way you can succeed. So God's saying to Moshe, I know you can't pick up a building 50,000 pounds, 2 tons, 5 pounds, 50 tons of material. I know you can't do it. But you know what? Try. It's your desire. It's your effort that I'm looking for. I'm going to grade you on your effort, not on the results. And the way you see that is that in the end, the results, God does. God puts it together. And it appears like Moshe does it, but it's really God doing it. And that's the point. That we all need to know that in our lives, it's the effort that's important. When you raise a child, you don't judge how good a parent you were by how the child comes out. Because you can't. You can only judge how good a parent you are by how much effort you put in. It's the effort, not the results. You have no control over what that child's going to be like. You could destroy the child, but if you're not a bad person, you're trying to help the child, no matter what you do, the child may still come out not the way it should be. It might not come out observant. It might not come out a good person. It might be a criminal. You don't know. You do the best you can. God judges us on our effort, and we have no control over the results. That's what that message is telling us. Moshe had to do that, because you have to do your best at parenting. You can work at your marriage as hard as you can, and you can still have a bad marriage. Right? It happens. You're not judged on the results. You're judged on the effort. Try to have a good marriage. Do what you can to have a good marriage. Everything that you can do, and maybe you'll succeed. But even if you don't succeed, you made the effort. If you don't make the effort, that's criminal. With children, with marriages, with business, with life. It's the effort that the Torah is asking us for. Okay? So that concludes us for today. Okay.